Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. Today's guest on the podcast is Kyle Henderson, CEO of Vizion. As many of you know, my background is in the bulk side of the business, and today we're going to pivot to the containerization side of the business, and I'm really excited to do so. It's something that I've done a little bit of with talking about ports and other things, but really we're going to talk about containers. Vizion automatically pushes the most complete, standardized, and detailed container tracking events to any software system or spreadsheet. So logistics service providers, shippers, and other stakeholders can get an end-to-end visibility into the freight that drives their business. Kyle, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Chris.
I'm like I said, I'm actually looking forward to this because it's always good to go outside your comfort zone. I could talk about tankers and bulkers and all day, but this is really cool. So talk to me a little bit about kind of where you are with Vizion, kind of what your vision with Vizion is, what you're doing, and kind of, you know, where you see the state of play of your company and the products you offer.
Yeah, thanks for the lead up. What we're doing here at Vizion is pretty simple in concept. You know, we see containerized freight as being one of the most important avenues in existence for global trade, connecting economies, et cetera. And maybe to the point of your podcast title, to some extent, it's one of these industries that's still in the process of digitizing in many ways. Myself and my team, our background is not in freight. We've never worked in the freight industry previously. We had built solutions and products for other industries, primarily around mapping and geospatial intelligence, data analytics, et cetera. And we had the good fortune of being kind of pulled into this industry maybe 7-8 years ago now. And we found that there was just so much need and also so much opportunity to help that digitization process gain momentum. And from our perspective, we found it challenging to try and kind of build modern software solutions in the space due to challenges around getting fundamental data for like tracking or containerized freight, having that data be structured in such a way that it was easy to build web applications, analysis, analytics, software solutions with specific use cases on top of it. And the idea at Vizion was pretty straightforward, that if we could help the industry improve the basics around digital with tracking freight and then helping them analyze the data from that tracking and then help them optimize the trade network using that analysis, then that would be value to all. And we'd be able to help people do great work faster. And so that was the simple idea behind Vizion. How do we create more momentum in the industry to deliver more software solutions and more advanced and technically, say, astute software solutions to the industry? The organization, you know, we're still relatively small. We're about 40 some odd people. We really started this company in the shadow of COVID. I think we incorporated the summer of 2020. It was a real bet at the time that the need for support and help around visibility, tracking, and analysis for containerized trade was going to be in a tough spot and need a lot of support and help. So that's why we decided to start the company at the time. The founding team, we actually quit all of our day jobs type of thing and went all in immediately on saying, hey, this is a big challenge that's going to need attention, and we think we can help.
Well, that says a lot that you went all in, and I think it was a very smart bet. And I think, you know, one of the things that I understand, and again, my background is a little bit more limited in this area, is that one of the hurdles is that it sounds like a lot of the major shippers have kind of their own software, their own way of doing things. Is that what you've encountered, you know, over it? And part of the standard, you know, part of it, what you mentioned was standardization. Is that one of the big hurdles in standardizing the data? You know, is that you have these companies, and they're not small companies, they're big companies that each have their distinct way of handling data that you are trying to deal with?
Just kind of due to the natural evolution of this space of going from paper to something more like a digitized piece of paper. And you know, a PDF is not data per se. It's structured-esque information, but it's not data that you can throw in and pull out of the database easily, type of thing. So, and also the nature of supply chain logistics means that there's a lot of interaction between organizations, big and small. I mean, when you see how many companies touch each individual container on each of their journeys, and how big the gap in terms of like technology footprint can exist between each of those parties, you see very, very quickly that it creates a space where it's, one, difficult to even share information, but two, the nature of the kind of like the gap in technology abilities between companies starts creating bad information or bad data or more siloed situations at different formats. Like there's hardly any standards in our space today around what you would think would be very straightforward, like tracking events. I have to tip my hat to DSA with all the great work they've done around trying to provide more data standards for containerized freight. But the reality is, like, in terms of adoption, it's still kind of a wild west. I mean, even the ocean carriers themselves don't agree on the names of any of the events, and they're all kind of doing the same job at the end of the day. I don't want to demean it by any means. It's complicated. It's tough work. It is complex moving these containers around. But at the end of the day, it's either a box got put onto a vehicle of some sort, taken off, or it went through a gate or came out of a gate at a facility somewhere. And then there's a little bit of status information kind of around paperwork and approvals. There are no standards in terms of the human readable information. There are no standards in terms of the data. And this makes it very challenging when you want to help every company track all of their freight globally all the time, door to door.
I think one of the things that you touched upon, which is very interesting, is just the gap in not necessarily the knowledge, but the underlying structure and the software and things of that nature. I had on somebody, and this is like the second or third time I've talked about it because it really stuck out. Is I had Yuri Hart on, who's a cybersecurity expert, and he said when he talks to shipping companies, to the ship owners, he still has people like, with Windows 7 on the ship. So I'm sure that's a very similar type of, type of event that or type of situation you encounter. Is that you have people who have this older software, out of date software. I mean, you and I could be a shipper of a container of freight, and then we're dealing with Maersk or MSC, right? And you're talking about two very different organizations. I run a mom and pop, maybe a warehouse or something else, and I move some goods from here to there. I need some goods, and then you have MSC that's or CMA, CGM, that is just tremendously large, and we both need the same information. When's my container going to arrive at my warehouse?
And there's no organization that can say make the rules from a top-down perspective, right? Because it's international by its nature. There's been a big push in the United States to create some more data standards around visibility in the past few years, but that's in the US. Now, I think it's going to be very helpful because that's a major player in all of this. And a huge amount of freight goes in and out of the US. So it's going to kind of push some changes. But the reality is like of all the 240, 250 million container trips that happen per year, it's only like 20 to 30% of them actually end up touching the US in some way, shape, or form.
There is a very similar thing happening as well, just more on ships in general, where one of the things that you would think is a canon event that's pretty simple, but yet it has a lot of hair on it, is a noon report, which I draw a lot of parallels to it. Everybody does one. Everybody needs one. And yet there's so much in the way that people, send the information over. And now that's going to become more important when you talk about ESG. Again, I'm getting off a topic of the containers, but to talk about just in general, standardization is so important in our industry. You're moving internationally, and everybody wants to make sure they get the same information over. And that's such an important part of what standards provide and what you guys are trying to do as well. Is there anything that you could talk about in terms of a big project or a big onboarding or a big upgrade that you're working on there?
So much of what we have done in the past 3 to 4 years has been connecting to all the data sources and making sense of all the data sources to make sure the fundamentals of the data structure and the data information and the data scope are sound. Because the intent is to make it easy to build software solutions off of this data. And people know garbage in, garbage out type of thing. So we want to make sure that the data is very sound so that when you use it in a software solution or say a machine learning model or AI or optimization algorithms of some sort, you get quality output that you can leverage in your business use cases. So much of what we've done is about connecting all data sources. So we've connected to all of the major ocean carriers worldwide through a number of different means, whether that's EDI connections, APIs available, connecting to different portals that they might have online as well. And then that's just like to get basic information because none of them also agree on those events, et cetera. So there's an entire layer of data science and machine learning on top of that to be able to standardize and normalize all the events across the carriers. And then once you've done that, you start to realize all the holes in the data as well, where there's a lack of visibility that you'd expect. So work in the past 24 months have been about connecting to as many port terminals globally as possible to get the event data and status data that those terminals have in their terminal operating systems or in their portals in some way, shape, or form that aren't coming through the carriers, about connecting to a variety of AIS data providers. So the radio transmissions the ships are broadcasting that get picked up by satellite networks or towers on the ground. And even those different AIS providers, not any one of them has 100%. They each have pros and cons, or let's say a blind spot. So you have to kind of make sense of that. And
I know that very well. I know that very well in my role. One of my roles, and it's subsequently changed a little bit. But when I was before Vizion purchased Q88, my role was I was the AIS contact. So if something went wrong with AIS, I knew about it, and I would get these calls like, why is this, why don't you have this position? So such and such product does, you go online. I'm like, it's a blind spot. Or, and I'm sure you guys dealt with this. What was this, 2 years ago when China decided to shut down some of the AIS because they felt it had an overlap with personal information. I mean, I remember waking up one morning, it's like, well, okay, we're getting all these complaints, like what's going, and I had to work with one of our providers to well, yes, but we could route it. Yeah. AIS is, everybody thinks, oh, it just appears. Yeah. Okay.
and so many, I don't want to say AIS was a new solution per se, but there was kind of a next generation of opportunity and businesses built on it, say in the last 15, 20 years. But so many technical solutions, they're really good at getting you 80% of the way there, in the first few years. But when you have to optimize extremely complex systems and it really starts getting down to the marginal improvements, the long tail of effort to make up that last 20% starts getting very, very, very long. And so we've been dealing with that long tail around AIS and geofencing all of the major port arrival areas worldwide, geofencing every single berth at every single terminal worldwide, using that to turn it into events, because it's one thing, our customers expect events, right? They want to create fundamentally the core use that drives all other more technically advanced use cases is a tracking event of some sort and saying what the event was and where it happened. And that isn't even easy to do when all you get with AIS to some extent is some information about the vessel, maybe a bit of information about where it's headed from the captain's perspective.
Yeah.
Which every boat's maybe not great about putting in the correct information.
Absolutely. Or they have a draft. I have a one client who's super, he's on the long tail. He's on like, if there's something wrong, and it's great on one hand as a product manager, it's great to know. On the other hand, you're like, dude, really? But why is the draft on this ship, X meters? I know that ship, it's on my voyage, and it should be 8 meters, not 15 meters. I'm like, yeah. I don't put the draft in. Like, that comes from AIS, from the master. Like, maybe other platforms are guessing that it should be 8 meters, not, or whatever. But we've had that. One of the other things, you mentioned the other thing that people get 80 or 90% right, and it's something that's really hard to get 100% right, is email scraping or parsing. I mean, this sounds like the same. Yeah. Just scrape it. Have you ever looked at a list that comes in? In our case, you have somebody in PDF, somebody in email, somebody in Excel, so on and so forth, and then just describing a position of an open position of a ship. Is it open? Is it prompt? Is it prompt? Is it PPT? PROMT? You could go into 50 different ways of doing this. It's pretty amazing. Just knowing about also about geofencing. One of the companies that Vizion acquired is Ocean Bolt, and they have massive amounts of geofencing. And I just know the effort that went into it. And I think it was like, I forgot what they spent. They spent a very long time geofencing, and they started off with dry terminals, and they've built up. But just knowing that is like, that's not easy. And we've had clients, oh yeah, you should geofence this. Like, geofence is, I'm like, yeah, sure. Let me wave a wand and go from there.
And a quick tangent. It's also an interesting challenge quite often to say, communicate with a customer, because quite often their sense of the quality of the data is based off of single situations where the data was not correct.
Absolutely.
Versus looking at, okay, well, 99.8% of all of the other times it is dependable and correct, or is triangulated with other data sources, and it's like, multiple of the data sources agreed on this information, type of thing.
100%. It's what have you done for me lately, right? And it gets a little difficult, right? With data, and it sounds like too, not only filling in the gaps, but you guys had to do a lot of scrubbing of data, which is not.
Oh yeah,
which is
vast amount of work we do is the standardization and normalization, the scrubbing, the cleaning, the making the data dependable. But that's where so much of the value. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like you mentioned scraping, when needing to pull data from publicly available sources on the web in some way, you have to think about that's not a project. That is a continuous service, because your target's always going to be changing.
Right.
And so that means there's always going to be a touch of latency at some point. You can't fix it as soon as it changes, right? There's going to be a bit of latency.
You're speaking my language, Kyle, because I deal with this on a daily basis. In my personal role, we bring in data, AIS data, and we have to match it with our proprietary data, basically, on Q88. And, sometimes if we have a system set up that it highlights the ships that we have to do an auto update, right? And each day it's just a handful of ships. Sometimes it gets backlogged. Somebody goes on vacation, oh, that ship is out of, dude, man, like, how many tankers are there? Like, you're killing me, Smalls. And it's definitely one of those things that it sounds like we're at the point, and this brings me to the next question, but it sounds like we're at the point in our technology evolution that we got the 80% down, right? I think everybody was very happy. Ooh, I got AIS. Look, the ship is there. And ooh, I could track generally where my container is, middle of the ocean or, on a truck. But then when you start to get to that long tail, and that long tail is kind of where the differentiation is, I think, for many clients to the folks, to their, vendors. A question that I have, and this is something that just came into my mind. I was asked about a month ago, where are we in the digital evolution of the maritime business? Now, I gave my answer. And depending on what type of sport, given this is a global business, let's put it into football, European, not American football. And you have two halves. Where do you think we are in terms of evolution, adoption of, of kind of, moving technology to the point that we could be compared to, let's say, fintech or other things? Where do you think we are on this kind of scale? I gave my answer, and I'll share with you once you're done. I don't want to bias.
Okay. I live in the visibility world around movements, but I do pay attention quite a bit to all of the other events that have to happen around containerized freight. I'm going to keep these comments in the context of containerized freight.
Great. Yeah.
Let's say the one I know the best, or let's think about it more like there are three major stages in the business journey of containerized freight. There's the booking, there's the moving, and then there's the auditing. Because kind of at the end of the day, there's a lot of cash flow auditing, financial stuff that has to happen after the fact as well. Change in ownership, taxes, a ton, piles of paperwork. Okay, so if we're comparing this to football, soccer for the Americans listening, I think in terms of digitizing booking, we're still in the pregame show. Like the match hasn't even started.
Wow. Okay.
In terms of digitizing the moving, we're absolutely in the first half.
Okay.
And for the true auditing, in terms of digitizing, is there something before the pregame show?
I think it's well, when I was growing up, it was the schedule or the Saturday afternoon movie that you were waiting until, or the Sunday afternoon movie you were waiting to be over. I'm dating myself. That's interesting. That I gave a generic answer. And first of all, that was a fantastic answer. Because I never heard kind of the freight evolution broken down into three ways, and I'm going to steal that. I'm going to definitely mention it. I really like that. I think that's quite wonderful, and it's really kind of helps someone like myself who understands shipping in general say, well, listen, man, you're the middle part of this. We got this whole other thing that happens here. Saying that, I gave interestingly enough, the answer I gave to the person, again, knowing my bias, knowing where I came from, matches what you said about the moving part midway through the first half. That's where I said we are in the journey. Now, I was not considering, because I was just, didn't have the full understanding of kind of the full freight picture. But what you're saying is probably, if you look at it as a whole, we're probably in the first 10 minutes of the half, or maybe just after kickoff. If you look at it from a composite point of view, having to weigh in some of the
very
other
early.
Very early.
We're not nowhere near fintech, and
and that begs the question: will we ever get there, or will there always kind of be this element of, again, to put it into parlance of European football, will there just keep extending extra time?
Oh, we will get there to where fintech is today. We will get there. I think that the challenge is still rooted in the simple and core difference between so much innovation in fintech can happen inside national borders. And with shipping, it will never be able to kind of happen within one country's borders. It's always going to have to be a cross-border collaboration.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the things
that makes it slower.
That makes it slower, right? You look at. I keep coming back to this. I had a guest on who was on the IMO committee, MEPC committee, that the emissions and everything, and a lot of people said this was, it wasn't as good as what it should be, and he came on not to talk about what was done, but how it got there, and that he has to, you have to get all these people before it happens to get on the same page, and then during the event where everybody's looking and asking questions to get on the same page and to produce something that hopefully people will be somewhat happy with.
That's to agree on the concept.
Yeah,
not to agree on the functional application.
yeah, it's kind of right. It's kind of right. So we have to deal with that where, like you said, or medical community. I mean, the AMA governs what goes on with medicine here, and yes, that may be a guidepost for other countries. They may say, oh, well, this is what AMA use, and so on, or the CDC or other types of governmental organizations. They may recommend things internally here in the US, but has limited impact outside, maybe as guidance or anything else. Kind of brings me to my next question is you talk about like kind of, okay, this is a challenge. If you're talking to somebody coming out of school and maybe you're hiring somebody, whether it's on the product side, whether it's on the coding side, well, what would you tell them to say, and they may have multiple offers and to go work in more traditional software, maybe like a cool startup that's, I don't know, Uber for your dogs or something, which they probably have. What would you say to those folks to come and work in this industry?
I'd say the simple realization to share with them is making a 1% improvement here is a global impact.
Right.
Versus, Uber kind of got started in the San Francisco Bay Area. It took 15 years to kind of get to something. It's not even global yet, right? It's in how many countries? 20, 30 countries maybe at this point.
Right.
And then what's the actual impact? Well, it kind of is only a service used by a certain set of social economic class as well. It's like, you make a 1% efficiency improvement in global trade and you are saving billions and you are impacting the lives of billions of people as well. And in some sense, it's the Uber thing is easier to have an emotional awareness of, because you can see I use it. I got into my Uber ride. I have friends who are using it and talking about it. It's fixing global trade and supply chain and logistics. It's like an artist who is standing really close to the canvas, or maybe another way of saying it's I don't want to say it's a forest and trees problem, but the thing you are working on is so big you can't actually see it all at once. Ever.
Right. And the only time people think about it is when, if you're here in the US, you run out of toilet paper at Walmart, right? Or the closest thing that I could say is that kind of captivated everybody's attention. It was when the Evergreen ship went sideways in the canal, 2 years ago, whatever it was now.
Here we'll talk about species changing moments. Like if you think about ancient Rome, what was the number one innovation they had that allowed sanitation and water management. Right. You could say roads as well if you wanted to,
right?
Because armies around a lot easier, but when it comes down to it, it's fundamental infrastructure things have far more reaching implications than anything else. And we're talking about the second oldest human activity, trade.
I agree. I go back to, I started to read a book about Marco Polo, and they were describing in the book the relationship between the cargo owner and the ship owner. They were just, they were describing basically early forms of a charter party.
Yeah, I mean, you can go back to Mesopotamia and see some of that information. I mean, that's why written language was created. It was for accounting purposes, for trade.
It's when you start to put it like that,
it was inventory for warehouses was the reason we created written language.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to think about that, but I never heard it that way. But I that sounds about right. So that's really cool, because I know that one of the problems that the industry has, you mentioned about getting together for standardizations. One of the problems that this industry has as a whole, and people will tell you, is that the only time, and this goes back to the client, the only time that people know about our industry, whether it's containerization, whether it's tank, whether it's dry bulk, whether it's ro-ros, is when something goes wrong. So the thousands or maybe even tens of thousands port calls a day that ships have in and out, pilot events, all these things, containers coming off ships, on ships, they happen every day. I live in the greater New York area. I drive by, the Port of New York, New Jersey, and I see, cranes swinging in and out. No problem, every day. And going on to the trains, going out to wherever they go to. And yet, people don't realize, because it's silent, it happens in the background. It's not as cool as like, other types of industries, but it's like you said, you make a 1% change, you're talking about billions of dollars. And not even, if you make an efficiency change, that could have an impact on emissions, which is another kind of really a thing that people kind of look at, is how can this impact positively emissions. So that certainly is one of the things that I think attracts people to this industry. I did it because
the biggest thing in the world.
It is. I did it because I wanted to travel and wanted to meet new people and do that stuff. But because we didn't have this stuff not a lot of it when I was around.
To get back to your question, I think it's also maybe the most exciting time in a number of generations or centuries around trade, because nothing like information revolution had existed for trade, unless we go back to like that Mesopotamia moment where we went to written language. Right? Like,
yeah, I tend to agree. And I tend to think that, there are so many different avenues. And what's really great here, and one of the reasons for my podcast, is that you could have people contribute who aren't heritage maritime people. I mean, yes, I took more of a path, with going to one of the schools, sailing on ships, but you don't need to do that. You just need to have a passion for the industry. Okay, you can't sail on a ship, but you could write code, you could market, you could get into product management. You need to have the level of expert, maybe, embedded at some point, but certainly to get started or to be a contributor, you don't need that. And I think, the other part too is the environmental aspect. I think a lot of people like that. And that was just not there before. And you could work remotely, you could do all sorts of things. This has been fascinating. As we wrap up, I try to ask kind of a consistent question. So who is your greatest fictional superhero, if you have one?
I feel bad for saying I don't know if I have one, but I keep in my mind, I'm going back to the Aldous Huxley novel Brave New World, and I'm trying to remember the name of the character who it kind of is repulsed by Soma and decides he wants to go explore the wildlands outside. I can't remember the name of that character, but I always really, really appreciated that, kind of an affinity for that novel, because unlike other dystopian novels, I think it made the smart call by describing reality through rose-tinted glasses versus grunge and fog like you get in like a 1984 type of thing, an Orwellian dystopic. It's like the well-marketed Apple marketed version of 1984. So can't remember the name of that character at the moment, but I think of Brave New World.
Okay, that's excellent. Yeah, we've had a couple of Marvel superheroes. We've had a couple of other, a couple of James Bonds thrown in there. A couple.
I guess it wasn't a superhero per se.
No, it's all right. I like that because it's exploring and kind of maybe you could describing a little bit of your own journey here, trying to go out there and see what's shipping. It's wonderful. You get in, it's still wonderful, but we need to have a Brave New World face on all this. Well, Kyle, this has been great. I hope that you enjoyed coming on. I truly enjoyed speaking with you. I thought this was a very enlightening in a part of the industry that, again, I know I personally am not as familiar as, so I appreciate you coming on and thank you for taking the time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Chris, and I hope this is a good lesson for everyone who gets play.